Welcome to the 31st Annual Writers' Symposium by the Sea at Point Loma Nazarene University. I'm Dean Nelson on the journalism faculty, and tonight we have the privilege of talking with the great Jamaica Kincaid. She writes, hold on. Somebody wasn't paying attention. She writes essays, novels, short stories, and really long sentences on topics of displacement, family relations, gardening, and the unquenchable human spirit. Welcome to the Writers' Symposium, Jamaica Kincaid.
Thank you. You did that on purpose.
Of course they did. All right, so let's start this way. Your first full-time writing job was doing the Talk of the Town column for The New Yorker, right? That's
Yes.
an amazing first job. Who gets to do that?
I didn't know that it was an amazing job. I didn't know what The New Yorker was. In fact, I mean, when I came to America as a servant girl taking care of little children, and one of the family, the second family I lived with, the father was a New Yorker writer. And I didn't know what it meant, but he had the couple had these wonderful friends who were all very kind to me, one of them being David Halberstam. And I remember when I decided I didn't want to go to college after all, he walked me around the block. He and the person the father in the family, walked me around the block 90 in Madison and 90th and 91st, over to Park Avenue, down, and then back over to Madison, telling me I should go to college. And the thing they said that was that made me say, oh, all right, is they said, well, even if you just sit under a tree and read some Shakespeare. And I said, oh, that sounds wonderful, I'll do that. So I went to college, Franconia College, a college that was for hippies. I love hippies. And it was in Franconia, New Hampshire, not far from where Robert Frost lived, and Leon Botstein, who now is at Bard, was the president. He was the youngest president in the history of colleges, I suppose. And so I did that for a year, and I decided, but I really want to be a writer, and I wanted to be a writer for. That's another, who does that? You know, you're a 16-year-old girl changing someone's diapers and you want to be a writer. Well, I wanted to be a writer. And I went to New York and luckily enough met a lot of interesting people who mostly were gay men. And they were extremely wonderful to me for, I don't know why, because I clearly wasn't a gay man. But one of them, the genius George W.S. Trow, I'd said something, and he laughed so hard, and he said, would you like to meet Mr. Shawn? I had no idea who Mr. Shawn was, but I said, sure. So he took me to lunch with Mr. Shawn at the Algonquin.
This was the editor of The New Yorker.
The editor of The New Yorker was William Shawn. And I went to lunch with Mr. Shawn, in which case I ordered the most expensive thing on the menu, And then I noticed that he only had a slice of pound cake, and I thought that I'd used up the lunch budget. And he said to George, well, tell her to give it a try. I gave it a try, which was I wrote about the West Indian Day Parade in Brooklyn. And I made notes, and I typed up my impressions, and I gave it to him. And I thought, well, he'll ask one of the writers to write it.
Because you just turned in notes.
I just turned in my notes and my impressions.
And that's what got published.
That's what got published.
So this is what is, I think, just so amazing about your career is your columns for that magazine were just observations, notes, things you overheard. As I recall, one of your columns was just the expense report.
Oh, that was my favorite. Yes. By that time, I had felt a kind of permission by Mr. Sean that you should try things. So, he published, not only did he publish it, the things I had written, my notes, but he paid me $1,000. In 1973 or 74, $1,000 was a lot of money. I naturally went to Bonwit Tellers and bought clothes.
But this is what mystifies me, is it resonated with readers.
Well, again, I had no idea that there was a reader. There would be such a thing as a reader, that I should please a reader. I thought, I wouldn't have been able to say it quite so then, but to this day, I still think it's a reader who should please me.
Really?
Yes. Yes. To say, and the way you please a writer is by reading their work. But a writer should never write for a reader. Imagine, well, I use this example, but here's another version of it. You're a faith-based university. The Apostle Paul wrote all these letters to these various shans, Galatians, Corinthians, all these.
Ephesians.
Ephesians.
You want me to keep going? I know these.
A lot of them.
Yeah.
He wrote these letters to them, and I actually believe the Galatians were not happy with their letter. I read it recently, and I don't think...
It was a little harsh at times.
He could be very harsh, and I think that they just ignored him. There was something about love, and you act on something. But I was sure they didn't like it. In any case, there are no Galatians today. There are simply none, and then there are Paul's letters to them.
Oh, so I see where this is going.
Yes.
So
yes, you can't.
This is why the audience doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. There'll always be an audience if you write something good.
All right.
And Paul did write something good, even though I disagree with him on so many things.
Not that this is going to be all about the Bible, but didn't you at one point say you didn't like the New Testament because it reminded you of People magazine?
I did. I did.
What exactly made you think of People magazine?
Well,
we're going to move on to other stuff, but I am curious about this.
Well, if you, if you were, for instance, to take a tour of Israel, not that you would right now, but you would find that there's a place where Peter met Jesus. you would find that there's a place where this person met that person, or, well, the beheadings on the platter.
Yeah, that whole John thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Too many, the doubting Thomas. And I just found them after a while annoying, whereas the other part of the Bible, what you call the Old Testament, is just full of these dramas and these, even the little individual thing, well, you know, what to do with Hagar and Ishmael. Oh, send them out into the desert, and maybe we'll never see them again. Of course we do. You know, there are just so many incredible things, and I just have always found the New Testament sort of a problem, except when I got to Revelations. I loved Revelations. It was
Really?
so, yes. It was.
I thought I was hallucinating when I read Revelation.
You probably were. It was terrifying. The part I remember, but one part, the first frightening part, was when they turned to the rocks and the mountains, and the rocks and the mountains turned with their backs on them. And I had no idea that rocks and mountains could have backs, that they could turn on you.
All right.
So just telling you. So anyway, I don't. This is not a faith conversation. It's just a reader conversation. So that if you were, my interest in asking ridiculous questions about literature culminated over dinner when I asked someone who is very interested in Homer. Why there are no fish, or is no fish, are no fishes in the Odyssey.
Is this something that has plagued you for a long time?
It did. I looked and looked, and I wondered, why are they at sea? Is there no fish in the Mediterranean? In the seas that they are? It's the little detail, so that. Sorry?
What? No.
What did someone say? Oh, I thought someone said something.
Yeah, there's no audience out there, remember?
But no, I find these questions very interesting as I'm reading, and I will then write a long sentence about it.
Yeah. We've read those, and they're awesome. So, as I understand it, it wasn't until maybe you were age 19 that you had read a book that wasn't by a British author. You had read Dickens, Austen Keats,
Yes.
Shakespeare. All that was the King James Bible.
Yes.
That was your reading.
That is true.
Until age 19?
Yes. I thought that literature, as we know it, had been this wonderful, fashionable thing, like a kind of skirt or something, you know, that you wore. And then after Rudyard Kipling, people stopped doing it. So that, for instance, Lady Chatterley's Lover, which was banned in England, and somehow someone got it back to Antigua, and this person's sister stole it and lent it to me because they knew I liked reading. And I read it, and I thought, what's the banning? What's going on? I couldn't find anything objectionable in it. And then I found Penguin, which used to be a cheap paperback publisher, had a book called Lady Chatterley's Daughter. Now that was a book.
You learned a few things in that?
I learned many things I've never forgotten. And so, but to your point of not reading serious literature, I didn't know it existed until actually I went to live with the family who had the children and the father encouraged me to go to college, then they had lots of books. I found the book of the first thing the mother, who was a feminist, gave to me was Simone de Beauvoir, and I read that, and a feminist completely, but I often would disagree with things that she would say, though I can't remember them now because we're all so beyond that, yet we're not. But yeah, I'd never read a book, and then once I started to read, they had Nabokov, they had Catch-22, all sorts of American writing, which I never really took to very much, except for Percy, Walker Percy.
Sure. The moviegoer, yeah.
Yes,
Sure,
yes. Though then he too started to get rather funny. I remember a sentence he wrote in one of his novels in which he didn't like the way the Catholic Church had set up the Mass, and he talked about guitar banging, ass wiggling nuns, was one of the sentences.
Yeah.
And
Memorable.
but he, yeah, the Moviegoer is a great book.
Sure.
Then but I had never really read. A lot of my reading is from, old books, and I fell in love with Bruno Schulz and a whole set of writers from a certain period.
I'm also wondering, though, how that had an impact on you as a writer, because of some of the very complex sentences that you write, and even going back to when you were punished as a kid, you had to write. Didn't you have to write Paradise Lost?
Books 1 and 2. I was 7 years of age. And yes, and of course it had the opposite effect of what the teacher intended. I fell in love with the Prince of, he becomes the Prince of Darkness, but he's really the morning light, you see, at first, Lucifer. He's the morning light. And the sentence is, better to rule in hell than to serve in heaven. That's the sentence.
That stuck with you?
7 years of age.
Wow.
And
but I'm just wondering if you're having to copy books 1 and 2 and all of these British writers, do you think that had an impact in just these very complex structures that you write?
Yes, it does. But it comes from poetry, not the novels, not Dickens, not Eliot, not Trollope, not, what are the others? It came from poetry. We all had to read a lot of poetry, Wordsworth, Coleridge, Milton, of course.
Sure.
It came from poetry. And I think if I had the courage or something like that, I would have written poems. They would have been very bad, but I would have written poems because I was very much, the English, the colonial tradition was a lot of poetry, and usually poetry about England, about things you would never know or never see. It had and perhaps that was another influence, since I couldn't see it, since it wasn't familiar. It was a great influence on
Sure.
me. I had to imagine something. And just to throw that in, I know there's a movement to self-representation and so on, and that's all very good, especially in history, in the realm of what is true. So that, for instance, that nutty person who's president talking about the conquering of the West and the blah, and the blah, all of it existing only in his hair. That representation and all of that matters. But when you're creating something, it doesn't matter who looks like who, you know. It just your mind, and this is why I'm not particularly afraid of AI, or particularly, I could be wrong, but the thing to remember about this whole artificial intelligence business is it has no unconscious, and it can only tell you what has happened, but it doesn't know what to touch the table will create in you. And so don't worry about it. Let them do what they want. Let Sam Altman build a tower to himself.
So I'm glad to know we don't have to worry about AI. That's awesome.
Well, it's not that we don't have to worry about it, but we don't have to worry about it.
Got it. Okay. So there are some recurring themes in your books and stories. You've got these family dynamics going on all the time, particularly with the main character's mother.
Yes.
And would you say that for anybody, families are probably their greatest source of material from which they can write? I mean, if you had a happy family experience, do you think you would have become a writer?
I don't see why not. And this is something, you know, that people think that the unhappiness is some form of therapy, or you've let it all out, and it's really one of the problems with literature today, the memoir of the... you know, but no, I think if I had, and in fact, the early part of, say, for instance, the novel Annie John is very happy.
Right.
She has a wonderful relationship with her mother. But the mother in these books, I can, since you may have read them, I can give you some understanding of what I might have been doing, was trying to do. You know, for instance, take the myth of the Olympiads. Their father gave birth to them in the morning and ate them at night. Well, that's one version of a family, and I often thought our mother was like that. Gave birth to us in the morning, and when night came, ate us again. And so that's... but that doesn't mean she was evil. She was quite loving. When one of my brothers was in hospital dying of HIV, and the other one was in jail because he had done something. They were both in these institutions, but they didn't like the food of the institution, and they also didn't like the same food. So she would cook them 2 different foods and take one to the jail, one to the hospital.
Wow.
That's a form of love.
Sure, sure. Well,
However, it would have been better if they had not been there in the first place.
yeah. They kind of complicated things there, didn't they?
Yeah. So, the thing that most interests me, whether I'm writing fiction, not whatever it is I'm writing, and that's another thing. If you want to talk about how do I distinguish between these forms, and how do I distinguish? The most important thing, I think, when I'm writing is a truth to something, and I don't really know how to explain it to you, except I do understand that the truth is more like a prism. It has many colors.
You can look at it from this direction or that direction. Turn it a little bit.
And angled, and it's all the truth. A lie, on the other hand, is just dud. So, for instance, what I just referred to, the state of whatever we call our country nowadays, delivered by was a lie. The country wasn't just built by people moving forward and parting the Rockies with their Noah-like hands, or is it?
It would have been Moses, but go ahead.
Moses, no, I was thinking of Charlton Heston.
Oh, yes.
There was a lot of things that were horrible done. So what we heard the other night was a lie. And the thing about a lie, it's like another thing that man likes is coal. It's like it's just a dead thing. It falls to the ground. There's nothing to it. It has no prism-like beauty. That's a lie. But the truth, and it's all its complications, and one of the things about the truth is it's sort of, when you are trying to get to it, it forces you into all sorts of, positions, a moral position, good, be able to tell the bad from the good. It's complicated. You do things you do the right thing for the wrong reason, the wrong thing but it's not a lie.
Yeah, and that's why it's intriguing, is because you're exploring it. You're trying to at least address the question.
Yes.
So let me give you an example, not from Annie John, but from Lucy, where she says she would rather die than be an echo of someone, and that her mother's love was designed to be just that. And then she says, the times that I loved Mariah, it was because she reminded me of my mother. The times I did not love Mariah, it was because she reminded me of my mother. Can you explain that? Or I think maybe you just did when you were addressing.
Yes, the truth of that it's complicated.
Right.
It's this and it's this. They are both true. I loved my mother. I didn't love my mother.
Yeah. And then she realizes she had become
her mother. Yes.
And this is, I think, one of the most beautiful things that you explore is this. Through your characters, your characters, and then the reader then gets to discover who they are and who they are not. And that's what I think is so wonderful about your novels in particular. It's this self-discovery.
That's so kind, and I can tell you with some certainty that no AI or chat GPT could see what you just saw in that sentence.
Great. So you mentioned something about Annie John. There's something in Annie John where I want to ask if this actually happened to you.
Yes.
There's this wonderful story where she reads a story that she had written to her class, and they are in awe of her, and she is set apart because of what she has written. Did that happen to you?
Yes, though it was simplified in that my career as a young scholar, I was outstanding. Sorry, and
You just got to say it.
My fellow students were often very admiring. And as I was telling you earlier, I had a classmate who he and I were, in his mind, we were competing for, because they ranked us. So we were either number one or number two. And very true is the person who came in last had to wear the dunce cap.
Really?
Yes.
Like a pointed...
Yes, it looked like a crown. It looked like something you desired, the dunce cap, and you were sat in the corner far away from the others. Nobody wanted the dunce cap. It was quite cruel. Anyway, yes, it was.
You were set apart because of your writing.
I was, because of my writing, my way of, according to my teachers, not to be too religious, but the sort of thing...
You're at a faith-based school. You can be religious.
Okay, that's right. But the sort of thing I could do when I was there, I learned not to do it. It was, for instance, when we were told the parable of the loaves and the fishes and how it multiplied and so on. And the children, all of us were just very in awe of it. And I said to our teacher, but how did they like the fish, boiled or fried?
It's a fair question.
I thought so. Yeah. I was sent home.
You were sent home?
Yes. But I thought, you can't just give people fish.
Yeah, you have to do you want it blackened? You want it,
yeah.
Some
how
hot
would you
sauce?
like the seasoning?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it was not greeted with, but I was always the person who seemed to, and the poor teachers, because they were so proud of me, but then I would do something like that.
Right.
Yeah, but a lot of Annie John is true. But then I want to tell you how another, I sort of talked about Cronus in it, but one of the other layers of it is that it's the relationship between mother country and subject. Mm-hmm. And often the relationships in families were very much modeled on the relationship between the empire and us in it.
Sure.
That's one example of it. So it's not as simple as it seems, or as straightforward as it seems.
So actually, if I could, I want to talk to you about your style, your writing style.
Oh, yes.
So let's talk about Girl, for instance. Did you know when you started that was going to be one long, that's 300 words of one sentence. You got a lot of semicolons and parentheses and commas and stuff, but that's one sentence. At what point did you know I'm gonna just blow this thing out as one sentence?
Gosh, I wish I had that kind of confidence. I'm going to blow it out. But it's I think I can name names because the person is dead. But there was a writer at the New Yorker named Ved Mater, and he was, I'm going to say blind, but I think it's not the correct thing anymore. I'm almost 77 years, and I can't keep up with all the correct ways of saying things. But he could not see.
Blind is acceptable.
Oh, it is? Well, thank you.
Sure.
In any case, he could not see. And
What does that have to do with...
Girl, I'm coming to it.
Okay.
This is the second or third time today I've had to tell him I'm getting to it. So, and the reason why I have to get to it, because you'll see the arc of it. So he had given us, I was then married, young, I was 28 or something, a copy of Elizabeth Bishop's the first poem in it is in the waiting room. So what is the name of that collection? It's a small book. He had given it to us as a Christmas present, but I did not like him because he was very cruel to young women. The New Yorker had hired young women who'd had outstanding educations. Wellesley, Radcliffe, all kinds of places, and they'd hired them to be his amanuensis, and he treated them very badly. He would say things like, "Are you having your period? Did you wash your vagina today?" I'm not kidding. These are real things, and he made them so miserable that I, penniless young black woman from the Caribbean, decided never to speak to him. And he was a friend of my husband's family, so I knew him in a sort of intimate way. So he gave us this book for a present, and because I didn't like the way he treated these women, I decided never to read the book. But then one day, Sunday afternoon, I picked up the book Geography 3 by Elizabeth Bishop. The first poem in it is In the Waiting Room. And I picked up the book and I opened it and I read In the Waiting Room once. And then I sat down and wrote Girl. In retrospect, how I interpret that is it's as if someone opened the door and said to me, "Come in." And that's how I wrote Girl.
Wow. Wow.
So you see why I had to tell you about the blind man?
Yeah, I'm glad I was patient. So, but you've got these other style things going, like with Mr. Potter, for instance. You've got repetition, and these things in parentheses, and you have him say the same thing over.
Yeah.
What are we doing there?
Well, the influence of that, and what are we doing here, is the King James Version of the Bible. You will notice that a story begins again, and it begins with "and." Now, I had not understood the way I'm speaking to you about the importance of the conjunction. When you say, suppose you begin "and," so this is "and." There are things that come before, and but they have not yet been clear or revealed. And in my imagination, when I'm writing, and I do that, it's for that reason. I do not yet understand, but I understand what comes. And then the "but" often contradicts, and the contradiction is important and true too.
So that's why you keep circling back,
yes,
and bringing and doing the repetition and bringing it back to the present.
Yes, yes.
That's actually brilliant. It is. That is brilliant. So basically what you're saying is you could have written the Bible. And you just ruined that microphone.
Yeah, and that was a sign of a transgression.
Yeah. Okay, so
I could not have written the Bible, but it was a great influence. The other thing you say, repetition, is a big influence, is that when I was 7 years of age, my mother gave me for my birthday the Concise Oxford Dictionary, and it was the concise of the concise. It was a small...
I mean, you had to have like a magnifying glass to read it, didn't you?
Well, I had 7-year-old eyes.
Yeah, okay.
And I read it as if it were a book. I would read it over and over, and it was fascinating to read A to what we call Z, and then I would start again. And it has the influence of me repeating a word, but it doesn't mean the thing that it did before.
Exactly. Yeah, the new context changes the meaning of the word. Sure.
Yes, and to me, it makes... I don't know about the reader, but for me it makes the writing of it rich. I get so excited when I see that will work and that I will still be true to the thing I am writing about. The idea that it could have this, double meaning, yet the same meaning.
Right.
Yes.
So I've got to tell you what one of my favorite pieces of description from your writing is out of the Autobiography of My Mother. You've got this line that says, "My father's skin was the color of corruption.
Wow.
Copper, gold, ore." And then a few pages later, you say, "If I had loved him, had I felt sympathetic to him, I would have described it as the color of bread, the staff of life."
Wow.
That's you. That was, I read that and I just thought, oh my gosh, that is magnificent. Beautiful, beautiful description. You've got it everywhere.
And that's the Bible.
Well, there's some good description in there, yeah. So you mean that's the Bible's influence?
Influence, yes. That I would know the staff of life, and I would know the color of corruption. I still can. I mean, one of the things that fascinates me about the age we are living in is that it's a kind of golden calf moment, you know, and it's being ground up and we are forced to eat it, but of course God forgets that we shit.
Can I just say that in 31 years of doing the Writers' Symposium, there have been some things said tonight that have never been uttered in these interviews.
I'm sorry.
No,
I'm sorry.
no, you don't need to apologize. So when, and then you've got this other line. We're going to talk about gardening in just a second, so just heads up. There's this another beautiful line from Autobiography of My Mother that says, "Who you are is a mystery no one can answer, not even you, and why not, and why not." The mystery of who you are, that's kind of a reason to write, isn't it?
Yes,
is to try to address the mystery of who you are.
To know, to find out, to attempt. Who are you? I mean, it's one of the things when people get married or form. You don't know who you are. Never mind the person you've pledged your. And I'm not advocating divorce or anything, but it's something to remember that when you, however much you know a person, you don't know them because they don't know who they are. And that again is my other, not against, but to soften the frighteningness of AI. It can never know who you are. It can never know itself because the person who has created it I mean, I find it interesting that, it's created out of these things that are in us too, that, the scientist, the chemist today, the third element, and I know nothing about the table, the periodic
elements?
table.
Yeah, okay.
I know nothing, but I know the third element in creation is lithium. I'm very interested in lithium, possibly for reasons that are not yet clear to me. But,
they're becoming clear.
But they have noticed that communities whose source of water contains lithium has less crime, depression, and other sort of mental illnesses, whereas people whose source of water does not have it are very violent and so on. And the example, though they did not say Juarez, I think they didn't want to, but the city across from Juarez, El Paso, has the lowest incidence of crime and depression and so on in the United States. And by the way, just so I can be in the RFK scamming club, you can buy lithium in 40 milligrams over the counter at a good health food store. I am going to have my own brand of lithium, okay? So to go back to the things...
I don't remember how we got there.
Yes. You have not been reading my books carefully.
I think we were talking about how one knows oneself.
Well, that's what I was trying to say, that even though those things, those robots, those whatever, because yesterday I was in, I think it was yesterday, where there was a dog, a robot dog, sniffing and doing things, and he's made of we have in us the same things that are, because we are made out of dust and
stardust.
Yeah,
sure.
So we're not, but the element of knowing yourself. The poor dog cannot know itself, or the poor person, robot who looks like a person, cannot know itself because I know they say there's all this fear of one day it will surpass human beings. But I just sit on my little couch and say, let me see how this works. Certainly, whatever Elon Musk makes will surpass him, because that's a very low bar.
Well, I think I mentioned we were going to talk about gardening. So
gardening.
No transition here. I'm just going to go right to how is gardening like writing?
It isn't like writing for me so much as in the way I garden, I am writing too, so that I started to write about Again, my mother comes up. She always begins in these things. But I think, and the Bible, I bring that in. How did it
Sure.
come into gardening?
The Bible starts with a garden.
Exactly. I think I was talking to you today, and I was saying, well, of course there are other worlds, because how would God know that it was good? And I will have these conversations with. But the Garden of Eden has, everything. But there are two significant things. And they will make me argue with myself about the difference between creation and design.
Yeah, I made the announcement about cell phones. I know.
Yes.
What can you do? There's evil in the world.
And it follows us everywhere.
Yeah.
So the first two things would be the tree of life and the tree of knowledge. So I think the arrangement is significant. The tree of life is food, agriculture, and the tree of knowledge is horticulture. And invariably in gardening, so especially, the great gardens of this, that, England, Mesopotamia, the flower, anywhere you find gardening, you find that people have enough to eat, tree of life, and then they have things that they admire. They grow just for the sake of the beauty of it. And that beauty leads you to reflection, to wonder, to knowledge, is my interpretation of that particular section. Then as you go on and you read it, and of course the naming of things that God gives to Adam, there is I cannot tell you the importance of naming of something. To name something is to have power over it and to claim it. Because when you can name something, you can remove all that it has been and give it a new life. Naming. One of the, when I'm teaching this garden class, one of the things I will let my students read is Columbus's journal of the first voyage, where he is not expecting what he's seeing. He's not expecting, he's going off to China or someplace to meet the great Chang, or whatever he calls him. And so he comes on these islands, and he names them. The first set of islands is Cuba, Haiti, the Bahamas, of course, Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic. Yeah, so he, and he's completely baffled, and this is a really great thing, you students of these issues of colonialism and so on. He looks at the scene, which he had not expected, and he keeps using the word paradise. He says it's a paradise. And if I were writing it, I would put, but I'm going to fuck it up. Because that's in fact what he does. And then the second voyage, he goes on, and he now is better prepared for things he might find, and so he can reach into his memory or yes, of things he knows, so that when he comes across Dominica, say, he finds it on a Sunday, so it's named Dominica. Mm-hmm. Antigua is named after a church in Spain. Saint Kitts is named because for him, in silhouette, the island looked like the myth of Saint Christopher carrying the stranger across the raging river, and at the end of the journey, it's revealed it's Christ. So that's how Saint Kitts becomes Saint Christopher, and it goes on. Like that, he reaches into his memory for the naming, and he names them and claims them in the name of the King and Queen of Spain. And I have 1492 is much more significant than everybody gives it credit for. It's the end, 1492 is the end of Portuguese power. Portugal ruled the world, the richest people in the world in 1492. And in the 15th century, at the end of 1492, the world splits. And it's in this way. The Spaniards, in my view, the Spaniards, because of Columbus, gets this part of the world, or their influence, they feel wealthy because of this part of the world. And so they send their daughter, Catherine of Aragon, to marry into the Tudor dynasty, to strengthen the Tudor dynasty, to strengthen the Spanish. They always making these alliances. Well, so what happens? Catherine goes to England. She can't produce an heir. It leads to the split in the church. Those are two things, and we haven't even mentioned the Inquisition, which took place in the same year that Columbus sailed. Sometimes I find it in records as the same day, but never mind, that would be too cute if it was the same day. But when you look at these two things, and because after Catherine of Aragon goes to the Tudor court, and that whole drama of Henry and his wives and beheadings and so on leads to the Elizabethan age, in which I think it's Hood, one of her pirates, who are called Sir John this, Francis Drake, Sir Walter Raleigh, and all of them. They're real thieves, but they're called they're pirates, but they're called Sir this. And one of them introduces a new trade to England. The new trade is the slave trade. And that begins the rise of England, which comes to America. And so, when you ask me about gardening...
I was wondering when we were going to get to that. I mean, this is a fascinating history lesson, but I'm thinking I did was ask about gardening.
It's not a history lesson. It's what happened.
Okay.
And when we one thing... When we say history, when we say the novel, when we say the poetry, and I'm speaking especially to people who look like me in the audience, young women, young men too, the categories that we are forced into are not appropriate for our experience. So the history, Tudor history as it's written, is not capable of taking in what happened to us. The poem, certain forms, the novel, which I insist comes about as a distraction for people who are gathering furniture from mahogany trees and cotton, and which, by the way, extended the life of Europeans. They had warmer clothes. When you talk about these forms of saying what happened. Certain people, the existing form of history, the existing form of Gibbon, for instance, is not appropriate for me to write a history. I can't write Gibbon. I can't write certain ways. I can't think of it in certain ways. And so to gardening, I can't write about gardening the way someone named John Hunt would. His gardening is, he looks out on the landscape and he says, the genius of the place. I look out at the landscape and I think, am I the genius or am I the place? Most likely I'm the place, because the place and I are property. So this is how I came to gardening. I looked at it in a different way, the transformation of the earth's surface by European conquering power. And really, if it wasn't Europeans, it would be somebody, because we humans are shits. But just to say, how I came to gardening was beginning to look at all these things as I was being asked to read the Bible as a religious text, or the history of Columbus as the history. I couldn't do it. So I had to bring in all these things, the transformation of the West Indies, of fruit. The second biggest journey of the seafarers was Captain Cook, who transformed the West Indies with food from Tahiti and places like that. The breadfruit, which many West Indians know, is the real it's the real thing in the Mutiny on the Bounty. You know the Mutiny on the Bounty? The cargo was the breadfruit. The breadfruit was being sent to the West Indies as a cheap source of food for the enslaved. So how can I think of gardening how can I garden without...
without that history.
Without that. And then, of course, a fortune is made by plant hunters going to China, India, bringing back seeds, because once again people were prosperous. They had things of beauty, you know. So you have Thomas Jefferson, whom
he's complicated, isn't he?
He's complicated, and I find great. Well, the great thing about Thomas Jefferson, he was a great writer, you know, and the part people like is the pursuit of happiness, but the great part is the self-evident. When it becomes self-evident that you are not a table but me,
that's something. So we're gonna have to pull the ship into the harbor here. So here's I just have two other questions. One is, as a child, you prayed that God would let you come to America. Given what we have experienced in recent years, do you think your child self would still pray that prayer?
Yes.
Tell me why.
I would rather go to America than any place in the world, especially England. Have you seen British black people? It's the worst thing that could happen to you, is to be a British black person. And you can tell the British black people, I say that. I'd rather go to France. I was in Berlin, and the black people there speaking perfect German seemed much more than the black people in England. I mean, but yes, I would still feel that way because actually it's very clear to me that I can say out loud, the President of the United States is beneath the contempt of this cup.
Okay, so you answered that question. So final question is, we have a lot of people who are interested in writing, becoming writers, want to get better at it. What advice do you have for them?
I've told you that, forget an audience, simply write. Let Paul be your guide. You don't, the thing about writing is it involves something really, all of us can, it involves something rather holy. It's called the word. And you can't, I mean, you can write anything, but if you're serious about it, it's the word. And it's not about money, though of course one must pay the bills and one must eat and so on. It's not about that. I hate to sound, no, I don't hate to sound pretentious. Let me be pretentious. But
why hate it now?
Yes. Thank you. But it really is something serious to do, and it's not, one of the discouraging things, and I was teaching at Harvard, so many of my students, brilliant people, they were on something called the Harvard Lampoon, and then they would all go off and work for Saturday Night Live or The Simpsons or some stupid thing like that, and they were so talented. It's not, I mean, I like The Simpsons, but I'd really rather read Elizabeth Bishop and so on. But, life is difficult, and maybe every once in a while you need Saturday Night Live or something, but really, don't do it. My advice is, if you are serious about writing, is to remember that you are involved in something sort of unusual outside. It is the word, and as the book you hold most, you treasure most, says, in the beginning was the word, and the word was. Yeah.
Jamaica Kincaid, thank you for being part of our Writers Symposium.
Thank you.